Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the possibility of Parliament unilaterally revoking Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty with the various legal and political ramifications thereof. But first of all, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. So, when Parliament reconvenes on September the 3rd, it will be preparing to stop Boris Johnson's government from taking us out of the EU without a deal. The Prime Minister has no executive authority to take us out of the EU without Parliament's approval, but it is widely believed that inaction would do the same job. So, if so, unless Parliament backs action to prevent no deal, then Johnson's plan is that we leave the EU without a deal on October 31st. So far, there's been no clear plan for stopping the Prime Minister that has met with the approval of Jeremy Corbyn, whose support is realistically crucial for any move to prevent this. But if we get to the end of October and Parliament has taken no action to prevent a no-deal Brexit, and we're quite sure that Boris Johnson will do nothing to put the brakes on the situation, then only one option would be left to Parliament: revoke Article 50. Legally, there is no problem with this. Right at the start of the process, various court cases were brought to test future legal waters. The European Court of Justice ruled that there's nothing to stop the UK unilaterally revoking Article 50 at any time before the deadline has passed. It did note that it'd be a bit of a dick move to revoke it, have a little conflag about how to proceed, and then re-trigger with the intention of leaving again, but there's nothing legally to prevent it as long as it's genuinely meant at the time. And there has been widespread support for this action before we even got to the 11th hour. We had 1 million people marching in London to demand that we end this with a public vote, and 6 million signing a petition to Parliament to say just revoke it right now. These numbers far outweigh the numbers who have marched or signed petitions in favour of continuing with Brexit. It's also worth bearing in mind that the reason we're in this position is because recently past and present leaderships of the Conservative Party have become convinced that leaving the EU is the only way to save their party, as many of their backers desperately want to avoid the EU tax avoidance laws coming online in the EU, which would include the UK if we're still a member, in January 2020, just a few months away. This is why they are at fever pitch now. Any extension beyond October 31st is bound to go into the new year, and they will find it much harder to be secretive about their shady financial arrangements. And from the point of view of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn desperately wants us to leave the EU and for the Conservatives to take the blame. Now, in my view, it's two political miscalculations on his part. He has in the past bemoaned supposed EU rules that make his programme of nationalisation impossible. But EU countries do have nationalised industries. The UK has nationalised industries, so that's no barrier at all. In addition, the rules he's referring to, which actually don't prevent him, are WTO competition rules and not EU rules anyway, so even leaving the EU, we'd still be bound by them. His other political miscalculation is that the Conservatives, on delivering a damaging no-deal Brexit, will render themselves unelectable. However, if you don't have a general election for years after Brexit happens, then he won't be able to capitalise on this. Boris Johnson is aiming to have a general election on the stroke of Brexit. So people, the plan is, will vote knowing he's taking them out, but before they see the devastation it will cause. And if anyone is going to capitalise on the anti-Brexit vote, it's not going to be a party that allowed it to happen. But whether the leaderships of the two largest parties are right or wrong in their political calculations, and they can't both be right, that is what is determining their actions. This means that there is a very serious risk of arriving at the end of October with no way to force an extension. In this scenario, the only way to avoid a no-deal Brexit would be to revoke Article 50. Parliament has the right to do that, and it wouldn't need the Prime Minister to agree. But would Parliament do it? It's tricky. Although the Brexit referendum in 2016 was advisory and illegal, the narrative from both main parties has been that the decision should be carried out. They just disagreed on how it should be carried out. So the idea of Parliament, after all this time, unilaterally revoking Article 50 without conducting another referendum first would be seen as ignoring the will of the people. I have long said that it would be political suicide to do this. Many people who want us to remain would even see this as a poor move. After all, a distressingly small number of people are even aware of the legal and constitutional issues at work here and are blissfully unaware of the illegality of the referendum campaign itself. As far as most people are concerned, Remainer and Leaver, people voted to leave the EU. To go against this directive would give fuel to those who say that Parliament is ignoring the people in a country where there is already a severe disconnect between citizens and politics. So, back in March, when the march and petition were in full swing, it was politically impossible to revoke. However, although we knew that Theresa May was opposed to a no-deal Brexit and was happy to seek extensions and then just blame it on Parliament, Labour especially, the same is not true of Boris Johnson. It's not at all realistic to suppose that if he is not bypassed in some way, we will not be extending beyond the end of October. Parliament cannot seek an extension. An extension to Article 50 has to be unanimously agreed by the EU Council, and a nation may only be represented on the EU Council by either a head of government or a head of state. Well, our head of government is Boris Johnson, and Jeremy Corbyn has ruled out supporting a plan to depose him as Prime Minister this autumn. Our head of state is the Queen, but she is supposed to remain outside of politics. There was a plan by some MPs to ask her to attend the EU Council on our behalf, but I don't believe it would receive widespread support to ask the Queen to go against her own Prime Minister. It would be especially mad given that Parliament have a much easier option, and that is to just change the Prime Minister. But if Jeremy Corbyn refuses to support that idea, the only way that that can happen is for the bulk of Labour MPs and quite a few Conservatives to ignore their own leaders and form the government of national unity themselves with the Lib Dems and the SNP. This runs the risk of having the party whip withdrawn, of course, which means effectively those MPs would be kicked out of the party. As such, I'm not sure I see enough MPs being willing to do it. And this is when there's also an issue with revoking Article 50. Revoking Article 50 without another referendum is pretty unthinkable. But so is allowing the lunatic in number 10 to take us out the EU without a deal. But if Parliament finds itself in the situation where one of the two has to happen, which is the most unthinkable? It may well be that revoking Article 50 is seen as the lesser of two evils. But if it gets to that point, it will not have the backing of the leader of either Conservatives or Labour. It would require a backbench revolt on both sides of the House, the like of which we have not yet seen during this whole fiasco. So my view is that Parliament wouldn't revoke Article 50 if it came to it. Not because they'd rather we leave with no deal than revoke, but because there is a less controversial way to deal with the situation that they would have failed to carry out for us to have got to that point. So I think if you get to the point where it is revoke or no deal, Parliament's pretty much already made up its mind it would rather accept no deal. But that is just my reading of the situation. We are talking, after all, about the actions of hundreds of individuals with differing priorities, not all of whom are necessarily even logical thinkers. So adding the prospect of widespread political miscalculations into the mix makes it very difficult to predict the actions of Parliament with much accuracy. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.